I woke to the wrong kind of metal. An ugly scrape against my garage door that didn't belong to Tuesday morning or decent neighbors. Through the blinds, I saw a tow truck idling at the curb, and Veronica Hale, our HOA, queen of curb, appeal clutching a clipboard like a sword. My father's 1,989. Ford sat behind a locked door, my last piece of him, and she wanted it gone because trucks ruin the aesthetic. I killed the lights, dropped the red release on the opener, slid the floor bolt until it clacked and spoke into the doorbell. "Touch that door, buy me a new one." She smiled. Emergency abatement. That's when I called Sheriff Dana Brooks. His warning landed like thunder. People like her don't lose. They double down. He was right. By the time the storm rolled in and the power flickered, I realized this wasn't about a vehicle. It was about a line you don't cross and a trap I was ready to set. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. It started the way every HOA nightmare does, with something small that pretended to be civilized. A clipboard, a rule, a neighbor who decided they were the law. That morning in Cedar Ridge County was quiet enough to hear the drip of my coffee and the hum of the refrigerator before it all went wrong. The sound came again, a sharp metal scrape, deliberate this time, followed by a low, muttering voice outside. I slipped barefoot across the kitchen tiles, keeping the lights off. Through the blinds, I caught sight of a tow truck idling at the end of my driveway, orange hazard lights flickering faintly against the misty dawn. Beside it stood Veronica Hale, 55, perfectly coiffed, wearing her beige power suit and pearl earrings, as if she were on her way to a board meeting, not a breaking and entering attempt. The clipboard under her arm might as well have been a weapon. Behind her, a man in a greasy jumpsuit crouched beside the garage door, unspooling a steel hook with a thin cable. I felt that low-rising heat of disbelief. They were actually going to try to fish my father's truck out of a locked garage. The truck wasn't just a vehicle, it was memory on four wheels. A 1,989 Ford F-150 navy blue manual transmission single cab. My dad's smell of engine oil and peppermint gum still clung to the leather seats. He taught me to drive in that thing before he died. I'd rebuilt the carburetor myself the same summer. Veronica was busy lecturing people about mailbox heights. I pressed the button on my phone to pull up the security feed. The high-definition camera showed everything: the driver's hook scraping the concrete, Veronica gesturing like a traffic warden. I thumbed the doorbell microphone. "Good morning, Veronica," I said, voice steady. "That hook touches my door, you owe me a new one." Her head snapped up, eyes narrowing toward the camera lens. "Community standards allow emergency abatement," she replied crisply. "Emergencies for fires, not feelings." The tow driver snorted before catching himself. The camera caught it. That was good. Documentation always matters when you're up against bureaucrats with God complexes. I slipped through the dark house to the interior door leading into the garage. The smell of oil and cold metal met me as I unlatched the deadbolt and slid the steel pin into the floor brace. The heavy clack echoed like punctuation. Outside, the scraping stopped. Silence. Then her voice, sharp, brittle. "What was that? Did you hear that?" I grinned to myself, leaning my ear against the door. Nothing but the sound of the wind against the eaves. I went back to the kitchen, topped off my mug, and dialed the non-emergency number for the county sheriff. "Cedar Ridge Sheriff's Office, how can I help you?" "Morning," I said, calm as a Sunday. "This is Marcus Reed, 1,108 Pine Hollow Drive. There's a woman and a tow truck driver currently attempting to extract a vehicle from my locked garage. Truck's inside. Door's locked. They're trying to hook it from underneath." A pause. Typing, "Sir, just to clarify, the vehicle's inside your home." "Correct. Copy that. Do not engage." A unit's 3 blocks away. The dispatcher's voice was oddly cheerful. "We'll send someone over right now. Hang tight, Mr. Reed." I took another sip of coffee. Already doing that. 5 minutes later, red and blue lights flickered down the street. A patrol SUV pulled up behind the tow truck. Sheriff Dana Brooks stepped out, tall, late 50s, gray hair tied back, the kind of man who's seen every flavor of stupidity a small town could offer. I watched on the security feed as Veronica launched into a tirade the moment he approached, waving her clipboard like a medieval flag. I couldn't hear every word, but I could guess. Aesthetic violation, community standards, non-compliant vehicle. Brooks stood still, listening, one hand on his belt, expression unreadable. When she finished, he finally spoke. Slow, measured in that tone only sheriffs and teachers use when addressing people they've mentally placed in the hopeless category. "Ma'am," he said, "garage counts as private property. You don't have a court order. You don't touch that door." I swear I could feel the air go still through the camera. The tow driver froze mid-motion, looking like a man who'd just realized he'd been dancing on a minefield. Veronica, however, was made of ego and stubbornness. She jabbed the clipboard toward Brooks. "This is an emergency abatement order," she snapped. He took the paper, looked it over, flipped it front to back, then handed it back. "No, ma'am. This is a shopping list with delusions of grandeur. Pack it up." She sputtered, spinning on her heels. The tow driver didn't need telling twice. Chains clanked, hooks retracted, and within a minute the truck was rolling away in embarrassed silence. Veronica stormed off toward her silver Lexus heels, stabbing the pavement. Brooks walked up to my door and knocked. I opened it before he could speak. "Mr. Reed," he sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're not the first one she's tried to strong-arm. Won't be the last either. But she'll double down now. People like her don't stop when they're wrong. They dig deeper." "Yeah," I said quietly, "I've noticed." He tilted his head toward the garage. "That truck means something to you, huh? It's the last thing my dad touched before he passed." He nodded. "Then keep it safe. But keep yourself safer. Call me if she comes back." When he left, I stood by the window and watched the patrol car's taillights fade. The street returned to its suburban calm, sprinklers, ticking birds starting their morning chorus, the smell of fresh-cut grass in the air. It almost felt normal again. Almost. But as I looked down at the faint scratch marks along the bottom edge of my garage door, I knew it wasn't over. Veronica Hale wasn't the type to accept defeat. She'd lost face in front of law enforcement, the ultimate humiliation for an HOA president. That night, as the sun dipped behind the oaks and the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one, I sat in the garage beside my father's truck. My reflection stared back at me in the faded chrome of the bumper, tired, angry, but calm. My dad used to say, "The first rule of property is knowing where your line is and never letting anyone move it for you." I ran my hand along the dented edge of the garage door, the same one that had held firm this morning. The metal was cold but solid. It had held its ground just like I would. The war had started, and the first shot had already been fired. The next morning arrived with the smell of wet pavement and that eerie calm you only get after a fight that hasn't really ended. The tow truck was gone, the street looked perfectly normal again, but normal didn't mean safe. In neighborhoods like Cedar Ridge, hostility didn't come as shouting matches. It came folded in envelopes. Sure enough, when I opened my front door to grab the paper, a cream-colored envelope was tucked into the handle. The HOA crest gleamed at the top, a stylized tree surrounded by a gold border. Elegant, pretentious, and completely full of nonsense. I opened it right there on the porch. Notice of violation section 4B, decorative noise intrusion. Decorative noise. It took me a second to process what that even meant. Then I realized they were going after my mom's wind chimes. I turned to look at them hanging quietly from the porch beam. 3 bamboo tubes, a simple gift from years ago, making the softest clack in the morning breeze. To call that a nuisance was like accusing a kitten of assault. I scanned further down the letter. Rectify within 48 hours or face a $75 fine. Signed, of course, by Veronica Hale, President. I laughed out loud. It wasn't anger yet, not fully. Just that slow, simmering disbelief that someone could go from attempted truck theft to anti-wind chime crusader overnight. So I did the most dangerous thing you can do to a control freak. I ignored her. Later that morning, I called my friend Ben Tran, who lived 2 streets over. Ben was a software engineer like me, but where I preferred quiet and logic, he thrived on chaos. "She's coming for your chimes," he said between bursts of laughter. "Bro, that's it. This is war. Suburban war." "It's a violation notice, not Normandy," I said dryly. "Uh-huh. That's how they get you. 1 noise complaint at a time. Then, bam, they're measuring your grass height." He wasn't wrong. 2 days later, another letter arrived. Mailbox flag, non-compliant, shade of red. The next day, 1 more garden hose improperly coiled. It was absurd. Petty. But that was the trick. 1,000 paper cuts designed to bleed your patience dry. Ben dropped by that evening with his usual grin and a 6-pack. "Okay," he said, cracking a can open. "You've got 2 options, fold or troll." "What's it gonna be?" "Neither," I muttered. "Wrong answer." He grinned wider. "We troll." By sunset, my porch looked like a wind chime orchestra. 3 new sets hung beside the bamboo original one, made of heavy steel tubes that sang deep baritone notes, another of delicate glass that shimmered like fairy bells, and a final one with tiny aluminum rods that tinkled like madness. When the wind picked up, the sound was glorious chaos. It echoed down the street like the soundtrack to an art exhibit curated by insomnia. Ben raised his can in salute. "Let freedom ring." The next morning I knew she'd heard it. Veronica's Lexus slowed to a crawl as it passed my house. Her head turned, lips tight, expression calculating. She didn't stop, that wasn't her way. She preferred to attack through paperwork. Sure enough, the HOA newsletter hit the following week. It was usually a 4-page pamphlet about things like the annual barbecue or pet leash reminders. But this issue, Special Bulletin Maintaining Property Values, was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive warfare. Residents are reminded that visible project vehicles, excessive lawn ornaments, and persistent sound-producing decorations can negatively impact the neighborhood aesthetic, it read. No names, of course. But every line screamed me. She even added a Neighbor of the Month section, a smiling portrait of herself beside her immaculate rose bushes. The caption, setting the standard for community excellence. I stared at it over my morning coffee and decided I'd had enough. That night I designed my own newsletter, the Cedar Ridge Reality Check. It looked professional, same layout, same fonts. But the content, nuclear-level satire. The headline article, Vehicle of the Month, Marcus Reed's 1,989 Ford Phone 150 amperes, tribute to American engineering. I added a mock advice column titled, Ask the HOA Whisperer. Dear Whisperer, my neighbor seems obsessed with my garage. Should I be concerned? Signed, Feeling Hooked. Dear Hooked, consider installing mirrors. Narcissists love reflections. Asterisk. By midnight, the PDF was in the inboxes of half the neighborhood, the ones who'd quietly rolled their eyes at Veronica for years. The response was instant. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop with laughing emojis, thumbs-ups, and one text that read, Finally, someone said it. For the first time, I realized something important: nobody actually liked Veronica. They just tolerated her because she bullied with a smile and knew how to quote bylaws like scripture. But public mockery, that was her kryptonite. 2 nights later, I caught her on my security feed again. It was 10:41 p.m. The infrared camera painted her silver hair in ghostly white as she crept along my fence line with a tape measure. She crouched, extended the tape, measured the slats 6 feet exactly. The HOA rulebook said no fence could exceed 6 feet. She looked frustrated, almost offended that I was in perfect compliance. Then, in a burst of rage, she kicked one of the posts. I nearly choked on my coffee watching the playback. When I showed Ben the footage, he howled. Bro, she's gone full raccoon mode, beige tactical suit and everything? Yeah, I said. And raccoons carry rabies. He grinned. So what's the next move? I don't move, I said simply. I document. Because now it wasn't just about petty revenge. It was about a pattern, harassment, overreach, and obsession. The kind of thing that looked small until you stacked the pieces together. And sure enough, the next piece came 3 days later. A certified letter, thick, heavy, sealed with a golden emblem of an eagle. Final warning and notice of intent to act. The language was dense legal jargon: failure to maintain aesthetic compliance vehicle deemed inoperable, liability for environmental contamination. At the bottom, a bold statement. If removal is not completed within 7 days, the association will act to enforce abatement and recover costs via property lien. It looked official, but something was off. The gold seal had Latin words that didn't mean anything, lex est pulchra, which roughly translated to law is pretty. I brought it to Brooks the next morning. He looked at it for 5 seconds, then laughed under his breath. This seal, he said, tapping the paper, belongs to the county clerk's office. But see this. The eagle's facing the wrong way. Left instead of right. Whoever forged this didn't even Google it properly. So it's fake. As a $3 bill, she's playing lawyer now. He leaned back, folding the letter. This isn't civil anymore, Marcus. It's criminal territory. Document everything and don't take the bait. I nodded. But in my gut, I already knew Veronica had crossed the line. And once someone like her steps over it, there's no going back. The war wasn't paper anymore. It was personal. The storm rolled in 3 days after Brooks called the letter a forgery. It didn't start as thunder. It started as that strange, heavy quiet, the kind that presses on your chest and tells you something's about to break. I was debugging code in my home office when the wind picked up. The blinds swayed, the chimes outside sang like a choir of angry spirits, and the clouds turned a bruised shade of purple-gray. Lightning flashed. The lights flickered once, twice, and then my house went black. At first, I didn't panic. Power outages happen. But then it hit me. The cameras, the DVR, every second of video proof I had on Veronica. The tape measure footage, the tow truck, the fake letter, everything was plugged into that same circuit. Without power, it was all just dead metal. I stood in the dark, the hum of silence roaring in my ears. The only light came from the faint glow of the storm outside. For a moment, I could almost hear my dad's voice. Power is a utility, son, not a promise. 5 years ago, he'd insisted on installing a backup generator in the garage. I'd thought it was overkill. I'd called it prepper paranoia. But he'd smiled and said, "You don't buy an umbrella when it's already raining." Now I was silently thanking him. From somewhere outside, there came a low cough, then a steady rumble, the generator coming to life. Lights flickered back on one by one, the air conditioner breathed again, the refrigerator hummed, and my monitors rebooted. The security feed blinked back into existence. My driveway appeared glistening under sheets of rain. The oak trees were bending like they wanted to uproot themselves. I watched the footage for a few seconds, breathing hard, waiting for my heart to slow down. Then I rewound the recording about 5 minutes. That's when I saw it. A white van, parked 2 houses down. No markings, no company logo, just sitting there engine idling. It had arrived minutes before the blackout stayed for exactly 6 minutes and drove away the moment my lights died. Coincidence, maybe. But after everything that had happened, I doubted the universe was that random. I paused the frame, zoomed in, and captured the license plate number. The next morning, I sent the still image to Brooks. He showed up 20 minutes later out of uniform, in a faded county-issued rain jacket and a pickup that looked like it had been through a war. He stepped into my kitchen, shaking rain off his hat. "Talk." I turned my laptop toward him and hit play. He leaned closer, squinting at the screen as the van appeared idled and rolled off. "Not a power company," he said flatly. "I checked the city's outage map," I replied. "No service calls. No grid failures. Just me." Brooks grunted, rubbing his jaw. "Got the plate." I handed him a notepad with the number. He typed it into his phone and waited. A few seconds later, he exhaled through his nose. "Registered to Clearview Investigations. Private firm out of Denver." He looked at me. "Guess who hired them?" I didn't answer. "Your favorite HOA president," he said, tossing his phone onto the counter. "We pulled an invoice last week during another case. Same van, same driver. They specialize in surveillance and utility interference consulting." Utility interference. Translation: people pay them to mess with other people's cameras, power lines, or Wi-Fi, usually for insurance fraud. Or in your case, to destroy evidence, I finished. Brooks nodded grimly. "Exactly." I stared at the paused footage again, my reflection flickering in the rain-slick glass of the window. "So what happens now?" He leaned back against the counter. "Now we make her comfortable. Let her think she's winning." That's when he unfolded the forged final warning letter from his coat pocket. This is how she's trying to scare you. But fear only works if you play defense. "So you're saying," I'm saying, "we bait the hook, son." He laid out the plan while the rain beat against the roof. We'd use her arrogance against her, the same arrogance that had her out at 10 at night measuring my fence. "She wants your dad's truck. Fine. We give her a truck," Brooks said. I frowned. "You mean a decoy?" "The county impound yards got 6 junkers that look close enough from a distance. We'll tow one over, park it in your driveway, and make it look like you finally gave up." He sipped his coffee. "Word will leak fast. You tell a few chatty neighbors that you're getting rid of the truck because of HOA pressure. Let it simmer. And when she bites," his grin was tired but sharp, "we'll have eyes on her the whole time." That night, I couldn't sleep. The storm had passed, but my head was buzzing with noise. Every creak of the house sounded like someone stepping on gravel. Every shadow felt like a threat. I went out to the garage, turned on the small work light, and stood there staring at the Ford. The paint was faded, the chrome dulled, but it was still beautiful to me. I ran my hand along the hood, remembering my father's calloused hands, the smell of oil and sawdust, the afternoons we'd spent fixing it up. She wasn't just attacking my property, she was attacking what was left of him. I took a deep breath and whispered, "Tomorrow, Dad. We set the trap tomorrow." The next morning dawned pale and quiet, the kind of eerie calm that feels staged. Brooks arrived with a deputy driving a battered county tow truck carrying a rust-eaten Chevy pickup that looked like it had lost every fight it ever had. We parked it right in the center of my driveway, tilted at an angle that made it impossible to miss from across the street. From Veronica's window, it would look like my dad's truck had finally been surrendered for scrap. Brooks smirked. "Perfect eyesore. She won't resist." As he briefed the undercover deputy, a young guy named Officer Grant, who'd be posing as a tow driver, I texted Mrs. Larkin, the neighborhood's most enthusiastic gossip. "Hey, I'm finally hauling the old truck tomorrow morning. HOA-1. Guess I'm tired of fighting. Please don't tell Veronica." The message was theater. The moment I hit send, I knew half the block would know within an hour. Brooks finished the setup. The decoy truck had a hidden dash cam, and Officer Grant's vest carried a micro body cam disguised as a pen. I had my own cameras trained from the windows. All you do, Brooks said, is stay inside. Let it play out. Don't interfere, don't even open the door. We need her to make the first move. I nodded, heart pounding. After they left, I sat on my porch steps and watched the decoy truck gleam dully in the Sunday. Across the street, Veronica's blinds shifted just slightly. Someone was watching. I smiled. Good. Let her think she'd finally won. Because tomorrow, the real storm wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from behind that beige clipboard she clutched like a crown. The next morning felt like the first scene of a movie where everyone but the villain knows what's about to happen. The air was too still, too staged. Even the birds seemed to be watching. By 7:30 a.m., I'd already set up my command center. Laptop open on the dining table, 5 camera feeds running, 2 outside, 1 from the garage, 1 from the porch, and 1 hidden in the decoy truck's dash. Sheriff Brooks had texted me at dawn. Stay calm. Don't move until I text you green. Grant's in position. The bait was perfect. The rusted Chevy decoy sat in my driveway hood, slightly ajar like it was halfway to being scrapped. Across the street, behind her perfectly trimmed hedges, I caught the faintest flicker of movement. Veronica's blinds tilted open a fraction. I pictured her face behind them. Tight smile, that self-satisfied glint in her eyes. She thought she'd won. At exactly 8:04 a.m., a low rumble echoed down the street. The unmarked tow truck turned onto Pine Hollow Drive. Grant was behind the wheel, baseball cap pulled low, chewing on a toothpick like a man who hated mornings. He backed into my driveway with practiced ease, killed the engine, and stepped out. He was perfect, no badge, no uniform, just a guy doing a dirty job for a dirty client. The trap was set, and like a shark drawn to blood, Veronica Hale appeared. She marched out of her house, phone in hand, clipboard tucked under one arm. Her heels clicked against the pavement with surgical precision. Even at this early hour, she was fully armored, navy slacks, pastel blazer, not a single strand of hair out of place. She stopped at the curb, glaring at Grant. Are you here for the Reed vehicle? Grant barely looked up. Work order says 1 pickup at this address. Guy's getting rid of it. I'm just the hauler. That one, she gestured at the decoy. He shrugged. Yep, looks about right. She frowned, eyes darting past him toward my closed garage door. Her gaze lingered there, long and greedy. No, she said slowly, voice tightening. That's not the one. Grant scratched his chin. Ma'am, I just follow what's on the paper. Veronica's tone sharpened. The other truck is inside. The blue Ford. Paper says driveway pickup. I said the one inside. Open the door. Grant tilted his head, feigning confusion. You got a key? Of course not. But the HOA has authority under Section 9 of the Emergency Abatement Clause. That vehicle violates our community standards. Grant said. And this clause of yours says, I can bust into someone's garage. Veronica's patience snapped. You'll be compensated for your cooperation. I already authorized it. Now open that door. On my monitor, I saw her pull out her phone and send a text. Seconds later, a gray sedan rolled up, stopping just behind the tow truck. 2 men stepped out, thick-necked mid-40s, matching black polos, the kind of security consultants who didn't need business cards. Veronica waved them forward like a general sending soldiers into battle. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. My hands clenched on the edge of the table. Grant played dumb perfectly. You sure this is all okay? Of course it is, Veronica snapped. I'm the HOA president. The 2 men walked up the driveway, eyes scanning the garage door. One gripped the handle, gave it a tug. Locked, obviously. The second stepped closer and shoved lightly at first testing. The thin aluminum panels rattled. Harder, Veronica said. We have authorization. I felt the jolt through the floor as the next shove hit. Inside the garage, the steel rebar I jammed into the tracks the night before held firm, vibrating with each impact. My dad's old trick, simple, quiet, unbreakable. The men hit it again. The noise echoed through the neighborhood, a dull metallic boom that sent birds scattering from the trees. Veronica didn't flinch. She stood there on the sidewalk, expression cool and imperious, clipboard in hand like a royal decree. That's when I saw the green notification flash on my phone. Brooks. Now. Outside, a new sound joined the chaos, the crunch of tires on gravel. From the corner of my camera feed, a white sheriff's SUV rolled slowly into view, followed by another behind it. No sirens, no flashing lights, just calm, deliberate inevitability. Grant stepped back, pretending to check his clipboard. Ma'am, he said quietly, might want to look behind you. Veronica turned her mouth already halfway open for another order and froze. Sheriff Dana Brooks stepped out of his cruiser, his partner right behind him. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They walked up the driveway like two men on a coffee break. "Morning, folks," Brooks said, his tone almost friendly. "Everything all right here?" Veronica spun her voice, rising an octave. "Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This man is refusing to assist in an HOA-approved abatement." "That vehicle inside violates." Brooks held up a hand. "Ma'am, before you finish that sentence, I'd like you to take a good look at what you're doing." He pointed at the dented garage door, the two men standing sheepishly beside it, and the tow driver with his clipboard. "Because it looks," he said slowly, "like you just ordered two men to forcibly enter private property without a warrant." "That's absurd," she snapped. "I have documentation." Grant, bless him, pulled the folded paper from his pocket. "This the one you signed, ma'am?" Veronica blinked, confused. "Of course I signed it. That's the authorization form for the abatement." Brooks took it from him, unfolded it, and held it up to the light. "Good. Because, see this line right here." He pointed to the bottom of the page where a new clause had been added in small, neat print. "By signing, the undersigned authorizes removal of property by any means necessary." "And you initialed it," Brooks said calmly. "Which makes this a signed confession." Color drained from Veronica's face. The two men behind her stepped back instinctively. Brooks's voice hardened. "Veronica Hale, you are being detained on suspicion of conspiracy to commit breaking and entering, forging legal documents, and misuse of HOA authority under County Statute 22-147. Her clipboard slipped from her hand, clattering against the concrete. "This is ridiculous. I am the president." "Not anymore, you're not," Brooks said. He gestured to his partner. "Cuff her." The two enforcers raised their hands automatically. Grant stepped aside, removing his hat to reveal the hidden badge clipped to his vest. I couldn't hear her exact words as they read her rights, but I didn't need to. The footage was crystal clear, every command she'd given, every arrogant gesture, every ounce of entitlement collapsing into panic. Through the side window, I caught Brooks's eye for just a second. He gave me the smallest nod. Message received. The storm was over. But as I stared at the replay on my monitor, the moment she signed her own downfall, I realized Brooks had been right from the beginning. People like her didn't stop when they lost. They doubled down. And what came next wasn't victory. It was the cleanup. The long, quiet war of paperwork, truth, and rebuilding what she'd tried to break. Still, as I stepped into the garage and placed my hand on the cool metal of my dad's truck, I allowed myself one small smile. For the first time in weeks, the air in Cedar Ridge felt free. That afternoon, the neighborhood was quieter than it had ever been. Not the comfortable suburban quiet I used to enjoy, the kind that hums with sprinklers, lawnmowers, and the faint smell of barbecue, but the kind that comes after an explosion when everyone's waiting to see what still smokes. From my living room window, I could see Veronica's house. Her Lexus was gone. The front blinds were drawn. The same people who used to flock to her lawn committee meetings now crossed the street to avoid being associated. A local gossip site had already posted a headline: "Cedar Ridge HOA President Detained for Forged Documents and Trespass." It felt unreal. Inside my garage, I replayed the footage again and again. Veronica's voice, sharp, commanding, full of entitlement, echoed in my head. "Get it open." That single sentence had done her in. Every officer in the county now had that clip. Every homeowner who'd ever feared their HOA now had proof that some rules were just bullying in fine print. Brooks returned that evening with Assistant District Attorney Sophia Nguyen, a woman in her early 30s with sharp eyes and the kind of calm you only get from living in a courtroom. She was carrying 2 laptops, a box of files, and a look that said she was ready to turn chaos into evidence. "Mr. Reed," she said, shaking my hand, "I've been briefed. Sheriff Brooks tells me you've kept records." "Every last frame," I said. "Good," she smiled. "We're going to build something out of it, something that lasts." They spread out across my dining table, Brooks, Sophia, and I. The same table where I'd eaten dinner alone a week ago was now covered in case folders, USB drives, coffee cups, and the faint smell of victory mixed with exhaustion. We started at the beginning. The video of the pre-dawn tow attempt, the wind chimes, the non-compliant mailbox flag, the power outage. Every petty escalation laid out like dominoes. Sophia was meticulous. "Each act on its own might seem trivial," she said, typing notes at lightning speed, "but together it forms a pattern: coordinated harassment, abuse of authority, fraudulent documentation. You'd be surprised how powerful consistency looks in court." Brooks nodded. "You'd also be surprised how fast a bully unravels once you take their pen away." The deeper we went, the darker it got. Brooks's deputies had already run a background check on the 2 enforcers. Veronica hired the security consultants in black polos. Both had misdemeanor records for illegal repossessions. One had been fined for threatening a homeowner during an eviction in another county. The van driver from Clearview Investigations, the same one who'd killed my power, was now cooperating with the sheriff's office after being threatened with obstruction charges. He'd confessed that Veronica had paid him cash, said it was a temporary disruption for neighborhood safety. I didn't ask questions, he'd told them. Sophia smirked when she read that line aloud. Classic HOA spin. Then came the money trail. Brooks slid a printed spreadsheet across the table. We subpoenaed the HOA's financials. Guess who signed off on nearly every payment to Hale & Sons Recovery, Veronica, I said immediately. Right. And guess who owns Hale & Sons, I stared. Her brother-in-law. Sophia's fingers flew across the keyboard connecting dates. $43,000 in emergency abatement fees over 2 years. No secondary approval. Bylaws require 2 signatures for any expenditure over $500. She looked up. That's embezzlement, plain and simple. Brooks leaned back. She built an empire out of intimidation. Every complaint turned into a payday for her family. As the evidence piled up, my exhaustion was replaced by something else: clarity. Every violation notice, every petty letter, every fake smile at the community meetings, it all led here. She hadn't just wanted control, she wanted profit. By midnight, the case file was ready. Sophia labeled it State v. Hale Veronica. Before they left, Brooks paused at my door. You did good, Marcus. But this isn't over yet. She'll have lawyers, friends in the board. The cleanup's the hard part. I nodded. Then I'll help clean, he smiled faintly. That's the spirit. The HOA board called for an emergency community meeting 2 days later. It was held in the Cedar Ridge Clubhouse, a small beige building that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and desperation. Every seat was filled. Even the people who'd spent years pretending not to care showed up buzzing with gossip. At the head table sat 3 remaining board members, all looking like students called to the principal's office. Veronica's chair sat empty, but her presence hung in the air like smoke. Gary Watson, the vice president, a nervous man with a mustache that twitched when he lied, tapped the microphone. Let's begin, shall we? The crowd murmured. Someone shouted from the back, Where's Veronica? Gary stammered, Mrs. Hale is, unavailable. Another voice, unavailable or in custody. Laughter rippled through the room. He tried to regain control. Now, about the recent misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, a woman interrupted. She forged documents and broke into someone's garage. That's when Sophia walked in. She wasn't in uniform or robe, just a plain blouse, slacks, and a calm, commanding presence. She carried a small USB drive in her hand. Would you mind if I speak? She asked politely. Gary blinked. Who are you, Assistant District Attorney Nguyen? She said, flashing her badge just long enough to silence the room. And I think the community deserves transparency. She plugged the drive into the projector. The lights dimmed. The first clip played Veronica at dawn, pointing her clipboard like a sword commanding the tow truck driver. Then the forged letter zoomed in under the fake gold seal. Finally, the footage from the sting, her shouting, Get it open. The room went utterly still. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. A neighbor gasped. Someone whispered, That's her voice. When it ended, Sophia spoke softly but clearly. What you just witnessed is evidence in an ongoing criminal investigation. The sheriff's office has verified financial misconduct, falsified documents, and conspiracy to trespass. But before the county moves forward, the law gives the HOA members themselves a choice whether to retain or remove their leadership. She stepped aside. The floor is yours. The silence broke like glass. Dozens of voices erupted at once. Outrage, disbelief, vindication. Mrs. Larkin, the same neighbor who'd helped leak the gossip, stood up and raised her hand. I motioned to remove the entire board, effective immediately. Gary tried to object, citing procedural nonsense, but a man near the front, Mr. Chen, the quiet neighbor 3 doors down, cut him off. Bylaw 7. Section 4B. Any board member may be removed by 2/3 majority vote of members present for conduct detrimental to the community. He held up a printed copy of the bylaws, the same one Veronica had weaponized for years. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sophia raised her hand. Let's vote. Hands shot up like fireworks. Nearly every person in the room voted yes. The motion passed unanimously. For the first time in a decade, Cedar Ridge was free. The meeting ended in applause that felt like thunder, loud, long cleansing. As people began to leave, Brooks appeared at the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. He didn't need to say anything. His expression said it all. You stood your ground. I walked out into the cool night air, the applause fading behind me. The stars were out, the air smelled clean, and somewhere in the dark I swear I could almost hear my dad's laugh, soft, proud, approving. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time it was ours to win. The days that followed the HOA meeting felt unreal, like stepping out of a storm and realizing the thunder had been inside your own head the whole time. For the first time in years, Cedar Ridge County was quiet. Not the suffocating kind of quiet Veronica had enforced through fear and fines, but the soft, communal hush of relief. Still, peace has paperwork. Sheriff Brooks and ADA Sophia Nguyen were in my kitchen almost daily that week, their laptops open, coffee mugs permanently stationed by the sink. My home had turned into a hybrid war room and evidence archive. The walls that once held photos of my father and my dog were now covered in printouts, spreadsheets, and timestamp screenshots. Sophia was laser-focused. "We're building a story," she said one morning, fingers flying across her keyboard. Every HOA letter, every payment to Hale & Sons, every phone call. One seamless chain of cause and effect. Brooks leaned back in his chair, yawning. "She's good," he muttered. "The kind of good that makes defense lawyers cry," Sophia smirked. "I prefer productive tears. I spent my days digitizing files, labeling every folder with obsessive precision. Wind chimes complaint, fake seal abatement, sting footage." By the time we were done, the case file was over 300 pages long. But the more we organized, the more tangled the web became. Sophia found something strange, buried in a bank record from 3 months earlier, an automatic withdrawal from the HOA reserve fund, marked Beautification Project Phase 2. There was no record of any Phase I. "Where did this money go?" I asked. Brooks frowned, scrolling. "Same vendor, Hale & Sons Recovery, $10,000. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "For beautification? Unless they're towing ugly trees, that's embezzlement." She leaned over to my screen. "You realize what this means, right? This wasn't a personal vendetta against you. She built a system, one that made her family money off other people's fear." I sat back, letting it sink in. "She turned a homeowners association into a racket." Brooks nodded. "That's the clean word for it." By midweek, the DA's office had enough to indict. Veronica's formal charges included forgery, falsification of records, conspiracy to commit trespass, misuse of HOA funds, and fraudulent contracting. The total potential sentence was over 20 years. But the trial was months away, and in the meantime, Cedar Ridge still needed leadership. That Friday, a handwritten notice appeared on every doorstep: emergency HOA board election, Saturday, 6:00 p.m. at the clubhouse. All residents welcome. Nominations open. When I arrived, the building was overflowing again. People brought cookies, folding chairs, even lawn chairs spilling out onto the sidewalk. But this time, the energy was different. Lighter, hopeful. The meeting began with the oldest resident, Mrs. Rosa Delgado, standing at the podium. Her gray hair was tied in a neat bun, her voice soft but firm. "I've lived here 22 years, she said, "and I've never seen neighbors so united. It shouldn't take a scandal to remind us we're a community. We need leadership that listens, not rules that punish." The applause was warm, genuine. Mrs. Delgado was nominated as interim president before she even stepped off the stage. 2 other residents, Mr. Chen and a young mother named Alicia Park, volunteered as treasurer and secretary. I didn't run for anything. I'd had my fill of HOA politics. But when Mrs. Delgado asked if I'd serve on the advisory committee for community improvement, I said yes. For the first time, I actually believed the word community meant something. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of rebuilding. The new board's first act was symbolic but powerful. They repealed 83 of the 120 HOA aesthetic bylaws, replacing them with just 3 simple rules. Keep your property safe and tidy. Respect your neighbors. If there's a problem, talk first, file later. They printed the new rules on a single laminated page and pinned it to the bulletin board outside the clubhouse, right where Veronica's 12-page monthly violation report used to hang. The second act was even more satisfying. The HOA's $42,000 beautification reserve fund, previously earmarked for Veronica's dream of a 10-foot-tall wrought iron gate, was officially liquidated. Residents voted unanimously to use the money to create something for the community, a tool library. The idea was simple: a shared space where people could borrow power tools, ladders, and lawn equipment for free. I offered to help design the space. We turned the old HOA storage shed, a concrete box Veronica once called the Compliance Depot, into a cozy workshop. We installed shelves, labeled drawers, even painted a bright mural across one wall: Cedar Ridge Build Together. Neighbors who'd barely spoken before were now shoulder to shoulder, sawing wood, painting walls, sharing coffee. It was messy, noisy, alive. At one point, Ben walked in holding a drill like a trophy. "Man, this is way better than HOA court." I laughed. "Yeah, we traded fines for friendship," he grinned. "You should put that on a t-shirt." But victory didn't erase the damage overnight. Veronica's house still loomed at the end of the street, its shutters closed like a pair of glaring eyes. The county had seized her HOA laptop, and records and rumors swirled that her husband was trying to sell the property quietly before the trial. A week later, a moving truck appeared at dawn. By lunchtime, the house was empty. No goodbye, no farewell note, just a lingering echo of arrogance fading into silence. Brooks dropped by that evening with the official update. "She took a plea deal," he said. 18 months suspended sentence, 5 years probation, restitution to the HOA, and permanent ban from holding any association office in the county. I raised an eyebrow. "That's it," he shrugged. "Justice doesn't always roar, son. Sometimes it just files paperwork and waits." I didn't argue. Watching her leave was justice enough. As he was leaving, Brooks paused at my garage. "You gonna fix that dent?" he asked, pointing to the small round impression left by the enforcer's last shove. I shook my head. "Nah, some scars deserve to stay." He smiled faintly. "Fair enough." When he drove off, I stood alone in the driveway. The sun was setting, casting a gold glow over the quiet houses. Kids were riding bikes, someone was grilling burgers down the street, and the wind carried the faint sound of laughter, the good kind, not the nervous kind people used when Veronica was in charge. Inside the garage, I ran my hand over the Ford's hood. The metal was warm from the day's heat, solid, steady. My dad's old wrench set still hung neatly on the pegboard right beside a new edition, a framed copy of Veronica's forged final warning letter, complete with its fake gold seal and misspelled Latin. It was my favorite piece of art. I looked around the garage, breathing in the familiar smell of oil and dust. The world outside had changed, but in here it still felt like home. Sometimes I could almost hear Dad's voice again, low and steady. "You did right, kid. You held the line." I smiled and whispered, "Yeah, we did." The truck's engine rumbled to life on the first try, as it always had. I sat behind the wheel, watching the neighborhood through the windshield, the same streets that had once been battlegrounds, now peaceful and alive. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like defending my ground. I just felt like driving. Autumn came to Cedar Ridge in a slow cascade of gold and rust. The air carried that crisp smell of burning leaves, the kind that makes you nostalgic for things you never actually lived. For the first time in months, I could step outside without scanning the street for tow trucks or HOA inspectors. The neighborhood felt alive again, kids running between houses, neighbors chatting by their mailboxes, the steady hum of power tools from the new community shed. The tool library had become the pride of Cedar Ridge. Every weekend, residents brought new donations, handsaws, paint sprayers, socket sets, even a generator someone had refurbished. The same people who once reported each other for unapproved mailbox paint were now helping sand picnic benches side by side. It was strange watching civility return after years of fear, like sunlight creeping into a basement that had been locked too long. I spent most of my weekends helping organize the space, labeling tools, fixing shelves, and showing people how to check things in and out. Mrs. Delgado, our new HOA president, ran the place like a grandmother running a bake sale, gentle but firm. Every time someone borrowed a drill, she'd smile and say, "Take care of it like it's yours, dear." It was the kind of leadership Veronica never understood. One Saturday morning, I found myself tightening a loose shelf bracket when Ben strolled in holding 2 cups of coffee. "For the foreman of freedom," he said with a grin, handing one to me. "Appreciate it," I said. "You finally fixed that lawnmower you borrowed," he laughed. "Define fixed. It starts, sometimes." We both chuckled. It felt good, normal, easy. The kind of moment that reminded me why this fight had been worth it. But beneath the peace, the aftershocks of the old regime still rippled quietly. Not everyone was ready to forgive and forget. A few of Veronica's allies, the ones who'd signed off on her fines and newsletters, were still around trying to act invisible. Gary Watson, the former vice president, still lived 3 streets over. He'd resigned before the vote but hadn't faced charges. Sophia had said his cooperation during the investigation kept him out of prison. Still, guilt had a way of leaving shadows. I'd see him occasionally walking his dog, always looking away when our eyes met. He never waved. I didn't blame him. One afternoon, I was in the garage polishing the Ford's hood when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was, standing at the edge of the driveway, hat in hand. "Hey, Marcus," he said quietly. "Hey, Gary." He looked older somehow. Shoulders, slumped eyes, tired. I just wanted to say, you were right. About her. About all of it. I knew she was cutting corners, but I never thought she'd go that far. I didn't say anything. I just let him talk. She scared people, he continued. Scared me too. Every meeting, every vote she had, this way of making you think you were the problem if you disagreed. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. For a moment, I saw the man behind the mustache, the neighbor, not the accomplice. It's done, I said finally. You're still here. That counts for something. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. Thank you, really. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. Nice truck, by the way. I glanced at the Ford. Yeah, she's still running. He laughed softly. Guess they don't make 'em like they used to. Then he turned and walked away, shoulders a little straighter than when he'd arrived. That night, the HOA held its first true community night. No agendas, no minutes, no votes, just a potluck in the clubhouse. The tables were covered with homemade food, the air smelled of chili and cornbread, and someone had even brought a karaoke machine. I sat in the back watching the room buzz with life. Sophia stopped by out of uniform, for once wearing jeans and a gray sweater. She grabbed a plate of food and joined me. Looks different from the last time I was here, she said, gesturing at the crowd. Last time we needed security at the door, I replied. She laughed. True. You know the DA's office is still getting calls about your neighborhood. Reporters, other HOAs asking for case files, even a few city councils. I raised an eyebrow. Why? They want to know how you did it, how an entire community stood up to its own leadership. I chuckled. Simple. We stopped being afraid of clipboards. She smiled. Maybe you should give seminars. God, no, I said, sipping my soda. One HOA war per lifetime is plenty. Her laughter was genuine, and for a brief moment the tension that had hung over all of us for months just dissolved. Across the room, Mrs. Delgado was making a speech. She talked about rebuilding trust about neighbors, helping neighbors, about remembering that rules were meant to serve people, not the other way around. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. I looked around the room, faces I'd once avoided, now smiling, talking, laughing. Even the teenagers were helping clean up. The change was almost surreal. Ben came over, nudging me. You realize you're basically a local legend, right? They should rename the street after you. I groaned. Don't even start. I'm serious, he said. You stood up to a woman who treated bylaws like the 10 Commandments and won. You're like the HOA Batman. I stared at him. That's the dumbest nickname I've ever heard. He grinned. You're welcome. After the potluck ended, I walked home under the glow of the streetlights. The air was cool, carrying the sound of laughter and crickets. For the first time in a long time, I felt something simple but profound peace. At my house, I paused at the driveway. The dent on the garage door caught the light, that small, hollow reminder of everything that had happened. I ran my hand over it, cold, rough, imperfect. Then I looked at the Ford, my father's truck. The engine had outlasted an entire dictatorship of HOA tyranny. I climbed inside and turned the key. The familiar rumble filled the garage, a deep, steady heartbeat. I let it idle, headlights spilling across the street. Mrs. Delgado's words from earlier echoed in my head. Rules should protect what's good, not punish what's different. That was the truth my father had always lived by. He believed in fixing things that were broken, not tearing down what was misunderstood. And now his old truck wasn't just a symbol of resistance, it was a reminder that decency, like an old engine, could keep running as long as someone cared enough to maintain it. I eased the truck out of the garage and drove slowly through the quiet neighborhood. Lights glowed in windows, laughter drifted from porches, and somewhere faintly wind chimes sang again, soft, peaceful, unafraid. I smiled. For once, those chimes weren't a declaration of war. They were the sound of freedom. Winter crept into Cedar Ridge quietly, without the drama of storms or floods, just a slow cooling, a softer kind of calm. By December, frost dusted the lawns each morning, the kind that sparkles like powdered glass under the first sunlight. For once, the neighborhood looked peaceful, like it had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. I spent more time in my garage again, not hiding this time, not defending it like a fortress, but living in it the way my dad had always done. The walls were lined with old pegboards and fresh shelves. The Ford's hood was open most weekends, not because something was broken, but because tinkering had become my kind of therapy. One chilly morning, I found myself polishing the chrome grille when a familiar sound broke the silence. Clack, clack, clack. The wind chimes my mom had given me years ago swayed gently outside, their soft tones echoing through the crisp air. For months, that sound had been a trigger, a reminder of HOA notices and threats. Now it just made me smile. There was still a faint dent on my garage door from the night of the sting. I'd promised myself not to fix it. It wasn't a scar anymore. It was proof that sometimes the line between losing and fighting back is just refusing to move an inch. Inside above my workbench, I'd hung something new, a framed document. The forged final warning letter Veronica had sent me, complete with its ridiculous golden eagle seal and Latin phrase that meant absolutely nothing. Below it, I'd added a brass plaque: "The moment rules became powerless." Every time I looked at it, I felt grounded. Not proud, not angry, just centered. That morning, I was changing the oil when Ben walked in, wrapped in a puffy jacket, holding 2 cups of coffee like he was smuggling gold. "Morning, Mr. Legend," he said with a grin. "Still worshipping your truck, still avoiding responsibility," I shot back, taking a cup. "Always." He leaned against the wall, glancing at the framed letter. "You know you could sell that on eBay as historic HOA relic. Probably fetch a fortune." I laughed. "Nah, it belongs here. It's a reminder." Ben nodded, then grew uncharacteristically serious. "You know, man, most people would have just paid the fine, maybe moved out. You didn't. You stayed. You fought smart. You changed this whole place." I paused, tightening the oil filter. "I didn't change it. We did. Brooks, Sophia, Mrs. Delgado, even the neighbors who finally spoke up, they just needed a spark." "Yeah, well," he said, sipping his coffee, "sometimes it takes one stubborn guy with a garage door to remind people how to stand up." We worked in silence after that. The kind of silence that only exists between friends who've already said everything that matters. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Mrs. Delgado. "Community Tool Library grand opening. Today 5 p.m. come see your work pay off." By sunset, the small concrete building that had once been the HOA's compliance storage facility was glowing from within. String lights hung along the eaves, and laughter spilled out into the cool air. The sign above the door read, "The Cedar Ridge Workshop, built by neighbors for neighbors." Inside it was beautiful. The once drab walls were painted in bright blues and yellows. Tools gleamed in neat rows, each labeled with a handwritten tag. A pegboard mural of the Ford truck sketched by one of the local teens covered one wall. Kids darted between adults carrying toolboxes, and the air smelled like sawdust cookies and victory. Mrs. Delgado stood at the front, holding a microphone that probably came from the old clubhouse karaoke set. "This," she said, her voice, warm and proud, "is what community looks like. We didn't need new fences or gates to protect it, just trust and a little hard work." Applause erupted. I felt something tighten in my throat. She turned toward me, gesturing for me to step forward. And none of this would exist without Marcus Reed. The man who reminded us that courage doesn't always roar, sometimes it just locks a garage door and waits for justice. The room laughed, clapping harder. I raised my hands, embarrassed. "I just didn't want to lose my dad's truck," I said, but the words came out softer than I expected. "Turns out we saved a whole neighborhood instead." When the cheers finally died down, Brooks appeared beside me, wearing his usual half smile. "Didn't think I'd ever attend an HOA event voluntarily," he muttered. "Neither did I replied. He looked around, nodding. "Not bad. You did more good here than half my deputies do in a year." "Yeah," I said, "but none of them had to face Veronica Hale in a pantsuit." He laughed quietly, clapping me on the shoulder. "Touché." That night, after the crowd dispersed and the workshop lights dimmed, I walked home under the stars. The chill bit at my skin, but it felt good alive. When I reached my driveway, I stopped and looked at the truck again. For a long moment, I just stood there thinking about everything that had happened, the fake fines, the forged papers, the humiliation, the fear. And then the turning point, that single, absurdly satisfying clack of the deadbolt sliding into place the morning I decided to fight back. My dad used to say there are 2 kinds of power in the world, the kind that controls and the kind that protects. For too long, Veronica had built her little kingdom on control. But protection, the power to stand up for something good, that's what lasts. I got into the truck and turned the key. The V8 roared to life with that deep, familiar growl. The headlights washed across the street, illuminating the tool library sign in the distance. I drove slowly through Cedar Ridge, past the houses that had once felt like battlegrounds. Now each one had its porch light on, warm and welcoming. Kids waved as I passed. Parents smiled. Even the air felt lighter. When I reached the end of the cul-de-sac, I pulled over, turned off the engine, and just listened to the soft hum of crickets, the distant laughter, and faintly the gentle clack-clack of the wind chimes on my porch. They didn't sound like rebellion anymore. They sounded like home. I smiled, whispering into the quiet cab. "We did it, Dad. We finally did it." Then, with one last look at the street that had gone from war zone to neighborhood, I put the truck in gear and headed down the road, the hum of the engine blending perfectly with the peaceful night around me. For once, there was nothing left to fight, only the long, open road ahead. In life, the battles worth fighting aren't always loud or heroic. Sometimes they're fought in silence with patience, truth, and the courage to say no when someone crosses the line. What happened in Cedar Ridge wasn't just about one man's truck or a corrupt HOA. It was about the moment a community remembered its backbone. We live in a world where rules can protect or destroy depending on who writes them. But no rule, no position, no title is stronger than the quiet power of decency. So whatever your garage door is, that boundary between peace and chaos, protect it, stand your ground. Because once you do, you might discover you're not standing alone. If this story made you feel something, hope, strength, maybe even a bit of righteous satisfaction, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button for more stories of justice, courage, and the people who refuse to back down.